Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth.
Well, hello, you good people.
Hello, everybody.
At least I hope they're good people. I wouldn't have any evil people out there.
If anyone's listening who's evil, then go do something like don't do anything.
No. Do something really nihilistic, like give all your money away by putting it in a super chat.
Yeah.
Folks, thanks for joining us. Welcome to Life on Earth on the Ayn Rand Center UK. Of course, we're going to mention super chats. Would love to see some of that super chat action. Hit the $sign, support the Ayn Rand Center UK that is providing outrageous programming like this, but also normal programming like the Daily Objective and the reality show, which I had the honor of participating with. I was on the panel earlier today, if you haven't seen that yet. But on Life on Earth, we talk about life on Earth. We talk about all the good things. We're a bunch of happy Pollyannas, except I've been thinking about, and this came up on the interweb. I'll share how that happened. In Atlas Shrugged, the big book, what Andrew Bernstein calls the New Testament. Of course, the fountainhead being the Old Testament.
It's the thing that saved my life, that's for sure.
It made a difference to a lot of people, and I'm certainly one of them. In this book, our protagonist is speaking to the philosopher Hugh Axton. And she says, I cannot believe that men refuse to see that they can remain blind and deaf to us forever, when the truth is ours and their lives depend on accepting it. They still love their lives, and that is the uncorrupted remnant in their minds. So long as men desire to live, I cannot lose my battle. Do they? Said Hugh Axton softly. Do they desire it? No, don't answer me now. I know that the answer was the hardest thing for any of us to grasp and to accept. Just take that question back with you as the last premise left for you to check. Unquote. The great Hugh Axton, the stand-in for Ayn Rand in that novel, although the fishwife also played that role. Now, I love the idea of a philosophical razor. Occam's razor, for example, entities must not be multiplied beyond necessity. It's sometimes paraphrased as the simplest explanation is usually the best one or the right one. Ayn Rand had a similar razor in regard to epistemology. Concepts are not to be multiplied beyond necessity, the corollary of which is they're not to be integrated in disregard of necessity. So that's Rand's razor. Well, there's a famous razor out there, Hanlon's razor, the author, Robert J. Hanlon. He said, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by neglect, ignorance, or incompetence. In other words, most people aren't evil, they're just stupid. I agree with Hanlon, though I add to neglect and ignorance and incompetence the earnest belief in bad, faulty, fallacious, and or corrupt ideas. But what about that which cannot be explained by neglect or ignorance or incompetence, or the earnest belief in bad, faulty, fallacious, corrupt ideas? What about real malice? What about those who want to do wrong, those who seek power as an end in itself, no matter the misery, the destruction that it brings? Or those who seek just to destroy purely as an end in itself, the real nihilists? Do such people really want to live?
Well, the end in themselves sort of evil criminal, or however that, I mean, I would say that is a sociopath. Psychopath. Oftentimes people will engage in evil actions as a means to an end, or so they think. That will be practical for them.
Right. Yeah. And that's why the idea of razors, of being able to divide categories, is interesting. I mean, there's several reasons why this is important to me. Two that I've got in mind, both challenges for me, and I think for most people. is it's all too easy to think, well, lots of people are evil. Most people are evil, to the degree that they fall short of, the moral perfection that I discussed with James Valiant yesterday, keeping it real on the ARCUK. To the degree that people aren't morally perfect, they're evil. But, if you take your average, not fully virtuous person, you're going to find that as distasteful as their occasional white lies or laziness or cheating, their failures, their shortcomings, as distasteful as all that is, they're not evil. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they can still be counted on to do the right things, at least when they have to, when the spotlight's on them. So my first takeaway is that some people are morally ambitious, morally perfect. And some people are generally good. And some people are not very good. Some people are just downright bad people. Some are outright vicious. So that's my first takeaway. And for me, that's a pretty easy proposition.
Yeah. Can I cut in here real quick?
Please.
So this reminds me of Leonard Peikoff's. So there was an audio lecture by Leonard Peikoff called Judging, Feeling, and Not Being Moralistic.
Yes.
And so the one takeaway from that lecture that pertains to what we're talking about today is sort of the degrees of evil that he kind of he laid out, he defined. You have bad, you have rotten, you have wicked,
yep.
And then you have evil, something along those lines.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And his whole project there was to caution against people being either morally agnostic, failing to judge when you've got to judge, or on being improperly condemnatory, out of context or exaggerated. And I totally appreciated that. And,
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I remember we had a lot of discussions about that when that first came out on 4 cassette tapes, which tells you how long we've been around this philosophy, this movement.
Second Renaissance books.
Remember. Yes. Yes. May not be played before a live audience without the express written permission. Second Renaissance. Yes. I remember all of the disclaimers and the copyrights. Anyway. Yes, Apollo Zeus in the chat says boomers. Yeah, well, I don't know. I was borderline between boomer and
Gen X.
Gen X,
Yeah.
Everybody now treats Gen X like they're old anyway. Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials. I don't even know where we're post-millennial. So that's pretty easy for me. And the evidence is out there. The evidence of heroism in business and industry, it's harder to find in politics, but the heroes are out there. And, people who are generally decent, and certainly the evidence of indecency. That's all easy to find. The one that's always been hard for me, and it's been all too easy for some of my peers, is the evidence that some people are actually evil. But they're out there. For every Ellsworth Toohey and Robert Stadler, oh, there's the board. But for every fictional evil person, there is a Joseph Stalin, or John Dewey, or Immanuel Kant, or Niccolo Machiavelli, Grigory Rasputin, Ivan the Terrible. It's strange how well represented Russia is in the list of evil people. But Bill Ayers, Herbert Marcuse. And each of these men, and maybe I should bring in more, female or Black evil people, because I'm being kind of biased and failing in intersectionality.
Well, the Aborigines and the
give me some minorities that are evil. It's always white guys, man. Maybe they're right about the whole dead white man thing.
Well, sometimes women can kill.
Well, at least in fiction. You know more about true crime out there, like
yes.
What's going on. So about the crazy people out there.
There are poisons.
Yeah, there are poisons. Arsenic and old lace. Each of these men seemed to be motivated to achieve an end. They certainly didn't seem to want to die. So in what way do we question, as we do, as Ayn Rand does, whether they want to live? Now, again, two categories. Some of them are just cowards and drifters. And they would rather die than be rational. It sounds crazy, but think about people who refuse to give up on their self-destructive actions and lifestyles. Does a chronic alcoholic want to live? What about the bum? I don't mean the homeless guy who's down on his luck, but he's struggling to get back on his feet. I mean the bum who regards the necessity of working as an affront. He is happy to live as a beggar, wants to live as a beggar, doesn't really want to live at all. Amy, as you put it, these kind of people, the drifters, the wastrels, or the hippies and the bums, they don't want to accept responsibility, much less pride or ambition. In other words, the way you put it is they don't want to live. They want to
get away with living. Well, but that you can apply that idea to, I think, any level of evil. It's all about getting away from the consequences and the responsibility. And we'll get into a little bit more of what is the responsibility of what for what in just a bit.
Right. Yeah, because I'm thinking I can see those examples. I've known those people. I've had friends go south in that way. But what about the ambitious ones? What about the idealists, the real power lusters, and the intellectuals? The corrupt leaders, but also the leaders' corrupt justifiers, the Attilas and the witch doctors. Would they rather die than give up on their aims and their ideals? I was reasoning all this out, and Amy, you, of course, brought up the central question, well, what does it mean to live as a human being?
As a human being.
As a human being. Oh, well, if you're going to qualify it in that way, but you kind of have to, don't you?
Well, yeah. You have to know what you're dealing with, who you're dealing with, what kind of creatures we are, how we function.
It's interesting to me because, Ayn Rand uses the expression man qua man. Man such as man is by his nature. And when she talks about man qua man, she's not doing what the Greek philosophers did, which is saying, well, man qua man means what the great men do. We can emulate the great men. She's asking what each and every man must do, given his nature and the nature of the world, the nature of reality. What must we do to live on earth? And in conversation, Amy, you said, well, you can't fool your subconscious.
No.
Which I would say your conscience.
Well,
it's adding everything up, whether you want it to or not.
Right. Exactly. And people will try to pulverize their brains, with alcohol and drugs and everything, to try to get rid of those evaluations of themselves. Yep.
Yeah, which is why integrity matters. You've got to be integrated. Evil people disintegrate. And I think you raised the example of James Taggart in Atlas Shrugged.
Yes.
Here, let me read that passage real quick.
All right.
What do you want? Some enemy voice kept asking, and he walked faster, trying to escape it. It seemed to him that his brain was a maze where a blind alley opened at every turn, leading into a fog that hid an abyss. It seemed to him that he was running, while the small island of safety was shrinking, and nothing but these alleys would soon be left. It was like a remnant of clarity in the street around him, with the haze rolling in to fill all exits. Why did it have to shrink? He thought in panic. This was the way he had lived all his life, keeping his eyes stubbornly, safely on the immediate pavement before him, craftily avoiding the sight of his road, of corners, of distances, of pinnacles. He had never intended going anywhere. He had wanted to be free of progression, free of the yoke of a straight line. He had never wanted his years to add up to any sum. What had summed them up? Why had he reached some unchosen destination where one could no longer stand still or retreat? Unquote. Now, sometimes we think, well, but a lot of evil people never have that comeuppance. They never have that moment of Gil Winan walking through the streets of Hell's Kitchen and realizing what his life had added up to. But as you say, I don't think they can avoid it. Whether they're conscious of it or whether they experience it in words or not, they experience it in emotions.
Yeah.
Their subconscious adds it all up.
That lightning-like evaluations of themselves and their place in the universe. I mean, what a horrible, when we talk about sense of life, what a horrible nightmare that is to be James Taggart, or even Peter Keating. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sense of that's what life is. That's what the world is. That's what the reality is.
And
Kill or be killed, eat or be eaten.
Yeah. So I talked about with you last night, because I've actually known evil people. They're not in my life anymore. Yay. Let's have a party.
So you actually have to take somebody who mattered at one point and write them off.
Yeah. Well, I had to reassign them as non-human.
Non-human. It's Mallory's drooling beast.
Yes, Mallory's drooling beast. But yeah, but I whenever I think of a person like that, I think of a tornado or, some sort of natural disaster, kind of something that's metaphysical that you can't change.
Yes.
So there is no reasoning faculty behind their face. They may as well be a boulder just coming down a hill at you, and you got to just step out of the way. That's all. And so I mean, it's really, really strange to do this, but it can be done. And oftentimes when you're dealing with somebody that you used to know and used to even kind of like or appreciate, or that they had some kind of good character trait behind, in them at some point of their life, it's kind of a grieving. It's a death. It's grieving when you realize that, this person is never, they can't change, that they don't have the capacity to change. They don't have the power, that they don't have the humanness to make their lives better and to be trustworthy. So oftentimes it's these kinds of people who are, physically abusive, and who oftentimes use alcohol and drugs to just kind of obliterate their own mind, because they don't want to think about their own lives. They don't want to be selfish, really selfish. They don't want to think about themselves. They don't want to care about themselves. And they don't want to fix what's broken. And they don't even want to identify what's broken, like in the case of James Taggart.
Yes. Or some peers we've known. Yes, absolutely. And if that sounds unusual to regard a person as metaphysical, you're not really regarding the person as metaphysical. You're regarding the facts of the person as metaphysical. Ayn Rand made this point in her outstanding essay, The Metaphysical versus the Man-Made. And the point she makes, the primary point in the lecture, is you can't morally judge nature. Facts. You can't judge the weather. You can run away from a tornado. You can say, what a shame that there's a tornado, but you don't say the tornado was bad. The tornado was evil. No, it's just bad for you that a tornado happened. But when it comes to people, you have to judge them. You morally evaluate what they do, because they always could have done otherwise. But she, like you, makes the point toward the end of the essay that once a person has done the thing that they've done, you do have to regard that now as a fact and determine what to do about it. So it's not that people become metaphysical, but what they have done, and ultimately the character that they have shown, needs to be treated as a fact. So you're absolutely right. And sometimes you have got to write people off. I know that can be an enormously hard thing to do. But for every bad person you write off, you have now opportunity for more virtue to come in your life. And in that regard, I want to say thank you to Equal to Reality, who is in with a super chat and says, for the dynamic duo, Robert and Amy Nasir, we need more of you on LOE. Thank you. I appreciate
Equal
that.
to Reality. And
Yes.
we need more of you.
That's right.
And we appreciate you. We really do. And I remember meeting you in London, and it was a lot of fun.
It was. So thank you for that. And thank you especially for the encouragement. And not to be outdone, Apollo Zeus is also in for the same 5 pounds and says, well, did Rand overemphasize reason at the expense of automation? And my answer would be no, because she addresses that as well. She doesn't talk as much about skills, but yeah, certainly in the literature, there's plenty of talk of automation, and you could not function without it. I would especially go through her journals and her other personal papers where she talks more about strategies. It's great how many thinking strategies are in, for example, the art of fiction and the art of nonfiction. You would think, oh, those are going to help me write novels or help me write journals, but no, there's so many great thinking exercises in there, and automation is crucial in that regard. So did she overemphasize? I don't think you can overemphasize reason in a culture in which reason is not properly appreciated, but I do appreciate the intention of the question, I think. But my short answer would be no, I don't think so. And the information is out there.
Yeah. At the expense of automation?
Yeah, I
No,
don't think so.
no, because one builds on the other. I mean, automation is built up by reason. You have to induce. You have to. It's that whole induction, grasping of reality, and building of concepts, and spiral theory of knowledge. And then by the time you're, I don't know, 10 years old, things are already automatic to you, at least by 10, hopefully.
Which means if you, and like some of us have, if you have automized either errant knowledge or bad behaviors,
Yeah.
it's only reason that's going to help you then change that
Yes.
by, well, sometimes it takes a great deal of repetition as well as sorting it all out
Yes.
to get yourself back on track. At least for some of us, it did. So what's challenging and important to understand and to integrate is that evil people are still, metaphysically, they're still human beings. And that means they still have a body, and they still have a mind, and they still have a psychology. They still experience, if not joy and happiness, then at least, fear and desire. And desire, however corrupt, for power, for control, for self-preservation, for the achievement of their ends and goals. They're still human beings, however errantly they're functioning. So yes, they do want to go on living in order to achieve their anti-life goals. So in that sense, they do want to live. But is that what a rational person means by a will to live? A passion for value, joie de vivre, a lust for life. So during her last speech, Ayn Rand delivered at the Ford Hall Forum, The Age of Mediocrity. She spoke out in support of the U.S. military's readiness to defend the country against the Soviets. Why do they keep coming up? And during the Q&A, she was asked, well, if the United States and the Soviet Union are able to destroy the world some 8 or 10 times over, why do we need to spend more money on defense? And she gave a long answer, including pointing out that, like all technologies, defense technologies do become obsolete over time, and you cannot let up on keeping your military technology up to date. But after a very long answer, at the very end, she said, and I would add something more. I would say, I hope they blow up the world rather than to surrender to Russia. And the audience burst into a long round of applause, after which Ayn Rand responded, and you could tell she was a little choked up. She said, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Now, this was an American response. There are people who want to live so much, so rationally and so passionately, that they will risk everything to live free, for the freedom to actually live their lives. And they will not settle for a non-human existence. This is life as a human being, as a man, as a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all that. And, say, yeah, it's, it reminds me of Ayn Rand's, her interview in Playboy,
Mm-hmm.
when Alvin Toffler, I think, what his name was, asked her, would you die for objectivism? And she said, yes, I would, but what's even harder is to live for objectivism.
Yes.
And takes all that thinking, oh, and that planning, oh, and that, and that long range thought. Oh,
Yep. Yeah, there's a passage from the Fountainhead that I highlighted. Gail Wynan has got Howard Rourke out on his yacht. They've become friends, and Wynan says to Rourke, he says, "I'm glad you admit that you have friends." And Rourke answers, "Well, I even admit that I love them, but I couldn't love them if they were my chief reason for living." Well, do you notice Peter Keating hasn't a single friend left? Do you see why? If one doesn't respect oneself, one can have neither love nor respect for others.
Mm-hmm.
And Gail Wynan says, "Oh, to hell with Peter Keating, I'm thinking of you and your friends." Wynan is emphasizing how important it is that Rourke is his friend. And Rourke says, "Gail, if this boat were sinking, I'd give my life to save you. No, not because it's any kind of duty, only because I like you, for reasons and standards of my own. I could die for you, but I couldn't and wouldn't live for you." Yes.
Yep.
There's a calculus here, because a lot of people will answer, and somebody actually asked during that Q&A, well, isn't there an intermediate stage before we destroy the world? Don't you want to live? And same thing in this, Rourke would risk his life to save Gail Wynan, even though he wouldn't then live for him. There's a calculus here, a willingness to die for a value, but a refusal to live under oppression and settle for a life under a boot. There's a whole discussion we could have about that, but I'd sum it up like this. Some people would rather die than give up their evil, ways. These are the people who don't want to live. And some people would rather die than submit to evil. And these are the people who do want to live.
Another way of death is to, get yourself into a situation where you've done something so evil, like murder, for instance, and you really don't care if you're caught. Well, I watch a lot. Well, I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and I find that oftentimes the criminal, the murderer, when they're caught, they're caught. And it's not like they say, "Oh man, I'm going to abandon a great life. I'm going to have to give all that up and go to prison because everything was going great for me until now." No, they know what they've killed. It's not just another person, but themselves in a lot of ways. They've killed their own spirit, their own values, their own goals, their own consciousness, because they're trying to obliterate that part of them, and they're trying to escape those consequences of the responsibility of being a human being, of being conceptual and volitional, and they can't escape their subconscious in that way.
Right. Yeah. Yes, exactly that point. Robert Stadler doesn't go to Project X with the explicit intention of dying a miserable death, but his choices do lead to that end. And he's a brilliant enough man to know better, whether he shuts his mind down from that truth or not. Does such a man want to live? You could answer that Stadler never confronts that reality, like in the stark, explicit way that James Taggart does at the end of the novel. But as you say, his subconscious and his emotions, his conscious emotions, his subconscious knows better.
Yeah, it reminds me of those situations in criminality where, somebody murders somebody and they say, well, I'm not guilty by reason of insanity. Well, if you obliterate your mind so much, and if you disintegrate your concepts so badly, you just might go insane. but you're still culpable for what you did. There's no more there. There's no more human being there. And yeah, there's no redemption there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you have a good handle on what that looks like day to day from looking at the crimes that have happened over the course of time. On a day-to-day basis, evil people aren't consciously taking steps to commit suicide, but that is what's happening spiritually or existentially or both every day of their lives, whether they face the truth or not. So, do they want to live? Here's a short quote from Atlas Shrugged. They do not want you to own your fortune. They want you to lose it. They do not want to succeed. They want you to fail. They do not want to live. They want you to die. They desire nothing. They hate existence, and they keep running, each trying not to learn that the object of his hatred is himself. They are the essence of evil. They, those anti-living objects who seek, by devouring the world, to fill the selfless zero of their soul. It is not your wealth that they're after. Theirs is a conspiracy against the mind, which means against life and man. Unquote. And if that's not clear enough, consider Hank Rearden's response to his mother. He's walking out on his pathetic family and leaving them to ruin, which they worked for all along. And his mother says, wait, don't go, Henry, don't abandon us. Don't sentence us to perish. Whatever we are, we're human. We want to live. And Hank Rearden says, why, no. He started in quiet astonishment and ended in quiet horror as the thought struck him fully. I don't think you do. If you did, you would have known how to value me.
Yes.
We want to live.
I mean, that's just, this is his mother. I could just, anyway, that's just, yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel anger towards his mother and towards Lillian and towards James Taggart and all of these people. But what it really comes, I mean, I really want to talk about the banality of evil. What does that mean, Robert?
Evil is petty and small. It's why James Bond movies don't make any sense, because evil is not a bunch of masterminds. Even if you can fill a room with Nazi generals and scientists with grand plans, underneath it all, it is petty. You look at the actions of the actual, the commandants, the people who ran the prison camps, or look at the ways in which the German military failed because of the pettiness and the corruption. There are reasons why the Nazis did not win that war, and it was not primarily about numbers. It was not primarily about military strength. If you read about the World War II, you will find the many ways in which these people who consciously thought of themselves as the good guys, who thought that manifest destiny was behind Germany's taking over the world and making it a better place, knew that they were committing evil. And it didn't change their minds in some grand way where they either became heroic or committed suicide. No, it made them petty and small, because that's what evil is. Evil is impotence. And just in ugly ways. The best example of the banality of evil would be a spoiler, but the end of We the Living. I won't say what happens, but consider that pages and pages are spent telling you the story of this one Russian soldier, this petty guard on the border of the country, who lives an entirely banal life, should not have anything whatsoever to do on the grand stage of life, should not have the ability either to achieve or to destroy anything. But that's the impotence of evil.
Mhm.
Evil can destroy, not well, not efficiently, but it can destroy, but it cannot create, it cannot produce. It's one of the fundamental reasons why we never had to take it seriously, did we? But yes, evil is dirty and smelly and petty and small and cheap and banal.
Yeah, I have more to say on this.
Yes.
And I don't know if you want to continue on. I think you have some more examples here from Atlas Shrugged and
Well, I mean, I could give the example on the positive side that makes the point, but I don't know, I get choked up when I talk about the wet nurse.
well, let's go with what I'm going to say then. Before we get choked up. Yeah, okay. So I mean, if you think of, back to my question of what is a human being, how do they function? And how is evil something that is banal or is inept or is the essence of lameness? How is that possible when it's just so destructive?
Yep.
I mean, snuffing out another person's life, for instance, or ruining somebody's life to where that victim will never forget the kind of horror they went through. The essence of this is, well, let me go back to the nature of a human being conceptual and volitional, and that kind of epistemology that a human being has and can't escape from. In other words, that faculty of reason in that sense is metaphysical, is the nature of a human being. They can't not be conceptual. And as when somebody commits an evil action, and this was my example from my true crime research, oftentimes when an evildoer say somebody does something really horrible to another person, extremely evil actions, you can fill in the blanks, and they have a gun and they say, you know what, I'm going to have to kill you. The question is, do they really want to kill that person, like just for the sake of it, or just because they hate that person? Oftentimes, no. They want to, basically, they don't really want to kill the person. They want to obliterate their witness's memory of their evil actions.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's not personal. It's that this person represents reality and the fact that I can't get away with something.
Well, not just that, but, oftentimes, you find criminals who are, I mean, you could say they're kind of ashamed of what they did, but only in the sense that it's not that they wouldn't do it again, but they wouldn't necessarily say, yeah, I plan on doing this tomorrow at 2:00. They're not conscious about it. They're emotion driven. And in that way, they're kind of ashamed of being out of control. And they're, ashamed of having to face consequences to begin with. And they're ashamed of the fact that their memory won't go away. Their knowledge of themselves as being inefficient, incompetent, hurtful, abusive, and evil will not go away. So the only thing that they feel that they must do is to wipe out the consciousness of the witness, of their victim. And oftentimes that's why they end up killing, not just to cover up the consequences, to get away with it because they're going to be doing it next Tuesday. No. It is something that
yeah, they don't just want to wipe out the person, they want to wipe out the reality.
Yes. And that gets into the whole primacy of consciousness idea, that they have convinced themselves at some point that in other words, they don't, oftentimes, after they're caught and they're in the courtroom and they're being sentenced and the jury comes back with this is, the guilty verdict. They sit there and they're not remorseful. they're never remorseful because they don't actually see the victim. The victim isn't psychologically real to them. The victim isn't actually a person with
No, the verdict's arbitrary. It has nothing to do with the truth because the truth doesn't matter. Just, oh, I didn't get away with it. Something's wrong here.
Yes.
And if things had gone differently, I would have got away with it. The right and wrong don't matter. The reality doesn't matter. The facts don't matter.
Right. Yeah.
And the people don't matter.
Right. Yeah. They don't.
Not the reality of the people.
Yeah, they don't see the extensive scope of their victim's consciousness, their values, their experiences, and they fool themselves into believing that the person is only their memory of their evil actions. I need to get rid of that.
Yeah, if I can make the person go
memory.
away, then there's no wrong that I did.
So there is a lot of epistemological and psychological nuances to, criminology in that way. And yeah, so when you think of it, what they want to do is they want to wipe out their own power of reason. They want to wipe out their own power of grasping reality.
Right.
That's how evil is lame
Yeah.
or banal in that way.
So is that wanting to live? Well, depends on what you mean by wanting to live. It depends on what you mean by living. I've got to give a shout out to Matthew Humphreys, who is in with a super chat. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Matthew.
And he says, most leftists I talk to seem to want to live, but are honestly confused. They don't understand the consequence of their ideas. Few are consciously irrational. And I'm glad you made that comment because it's the theme that we return to all the time, which is this is a battle of ideas, not individuals.
Mm-hmm.
The people matter because it's people who hold the ideas, but what is fundamental in the case of most people, and not the evil people we're talking about today, is that they actually believe the stuff they believe. There was one of the old memes went around again. It's a picture of the produce section of a grocery store. So it's beautiful, apples and oranges and grapes and grapefruit and tomatoes, and it's just lovely, colorful. And the meme's text reads, most of you will remember this, I'm sure you've seen it. I will never understand how a socialist can walk into a grocery store and think, I hate capitalism. Well, I don't understand it either. At a grocery store, it's beautiful what free markets can do, but the real answer there, the problem is when he says, I will never understand. Socialists can walk into a grocery store and think, I hate capitalism, the same way that conservatives can walk into a grocery store or a concert hall or a beautiful sports stadium or a Neiman Marcus, a Best Buy, Home Depot, any of a million museums and parks and riverfronts and arboretums, small downtowns, big cities, charming new houses or magnificent skyscrapers, filled with ordinary, decent people going about their business and enjoying their lives, and then think, oh yeah, this is George Orwell's 1984 and the world's going to hell. There's more to judging the validity of a socioeconomic system or the state of the world than seeing a successful grocery store. But the problem is the real truth that the meme writer wrote, which is, I will never understand. You're right. He will never understand. And that's the problem. And that's the answer, Matthew, is the problem is that not that the grocery store should tell us that capitalism is good. The problem is this is a battle of ideas. It's why the Ayn Rand Center UK is a channel I'm proud to be part of. And I appreciate your super chat. It's why Ayn Rand's philosophy, the second most important thing about Ayn Rand's philosophy is it's the only chance we have to save the world. Most important thing about Ayn Rand's philosophy is, of course, just living your own best life. But yes, we are simultaneously trying to save the world. So thank you for the question. And the answer is ideas matter more than the motives or instincts or emotions of people. Apollo Zeus is also in with a super chat and says, well, how do you morally judge the ignorant?
Well, first you need evidence that they are ignorant. And you gain that evidence by asking them, what makes you think that? And see if they are actually ignorant, or what lies behind this idea that they hold that you might think that they might be ignorant of, say, Ayn Rand's idea of capitalism, for instance. Yeah, I mean, then you can give them information. And then if they are, they just don't want it, or combative or obnoxious about it, then, you might think, this person is willfully trying to evade what I'm trying to say here. And then that gets into a moral issue when somebody is evading. But yeah, I mean, ignorant, children are ignorant. Do you morally judge them? No. You just have to find out. You have to actually talk to people. I know it's hard, but you got to, just talk to them. But I know it's still hard for me, So, yeah.
Yeah. Ignorance is always a question of, are they in a context where not just that they are ignorant, as Amy says, the first thing to do is figure out, are they really ignorant, but also, should they know better? The way it stands in my mind is this: do they know better? And should they know better? Are they in a situation where they should have known better, even though they didn't?
Right.
They should not have been ignorant. They had the opportunity to know better. And it's easy to say, well, but with the grade schools, with the current philosophical climate, nobody can know better. We're all poisoned. Or you could make the other mistake, which is to say, well, Ayn Rand's out there, and therefore nobody is rightly ignorant of these things. No. As you say, you got to judge individually.
Yeah.
You've got to judge the reality, the actual person,
Right.
which makes it harder. But harder is good. Makes you ambitious in your dealings with people.
Try to have fun with it and don't assume the worst of the person.
Right. Don't assume. That's always great advice. Never assume the worst, because you'll usually be wrong.
Yeah.
And the times you do assume the worst and you're right, it's big. It looms large. It feels like, people are always lousy, but no, it's just because it's a big deal. It feels like, oh, another disappointment. I'd better stop believing in people. But most of the people I deal with, decent people.
Yeah. So this is not a super chat, so I'm going to make an exception for Robin.
Yes.
He says, I find it hard to begin to explain things when it comes to objectivism, since it is all very integrated. And I do have this feeling too. And I sometimes feel like, oh gosh, I've got this giant monolith I want to stick in the middle of the room and tell people exactly what it all is. And we've got to sit there for 14 hours so I can explain this.
Yeah.
Actually, oftentimes, and this is where you have to kind of be clever in your thinking, and you have to be kind of imaginative and creative. You have to come up with questions. So you question them. And often, actually there was something on Facebook that came up recently. Sometimes it's, a question can be more revealing than telling something exactly what's right. Sometimes asking a question can bring out the truth without you even having to say anything. So, be engaged with the person, unless you think that they're absolutely horrible people and, and they're murderers or something, other than that, assume the best of them. Don't assume the worst. Be patient, ask them questions. What makes you think that? Oh, that's interesting. What makes you think that way? Oh, where'd you come up with that idea? That's interesting. Where'd you go? Why are you thinking this way? And they will tell you. Oftentimes, if you can give them a little leeway and a little bit of space for their own thinking, they might actually figure it out by themselves if you're asking them the right questions.
Yeah. And if you're asking, how can I explain objectivism because it's so integrated, in the sense of, well, if I really want to make this point, I need the whole philosophy. I totally get the feeling. I know that feeling, but, consider Ayn Rand's essay, What Can One Do? Mm-hmm. Where she was asked, well, what can one person do to change all the trends and fight all the bad stuff out there? She says, there's nothing one person can do. Well, trying to explain objectivism to somebody and to really make your point by bringing in the whole, it's kind of the same thing. I understand the desire. I've been there. I've tried it. Varying degrees of success. But really, what can one do? You can plant seeds. Yeah. You can put some truth out there. Yeah, you're right. You can't give them the whole philosophy, because that's what it would take to change their mind. Think of the way you discovered objectivism. What was the one bit, the kernel of truth, the one novel or the one argument that didn't convince you to become an objectivist? It just made you think, Yeah, I should look into that.
Looking back, I got into philosophy through music, through punk rock music, basically, for the most part. And that was not telling me what to think. Not usually. It was showing me how to think. It was showing me the kind of moral fire that you would have in your thinking. And so it was giving me the method, not the content. So sometimes by questioning other people, you can impart that kind of method, that rational epistemology you can impart onto them. And heck, they'll thank you for it, at least
Yes.
in my experience.
And if you can do that too, even if they walk away saying, man, that dude was crazy, they'll also walk away saying, yeah, that dude held his own. He seemed real certain of what he was saying. I know he's crazy, but yeah, I don't know. He made Ayn Rand sound almost reasonable. Maybe
Right.
I'll look into that.
And-
you can do as much as you can, and that's all you can do.
And I'll tell you what, if you're going to be engaging in that kind of conversation, the question and answer, you're focused on them. You want to understand what they think. It's better to do it in person, as most things are, instead of, it might work online, but if you're in front of a person in real life, they get you're expressing all the body language and all of the facial expressions and the tone of voice, and that's going to impart even more to them.
Yes. Now, remind me, who was it on the objectivist scene? It might have been Leonard Peikoff. It might have been Andrew Bernstein, who said, in trying to promote Ayn Rand's philosophy, I've reached the point now where the one thing that I do is I put books in the hands of people who might read them.
Yeah, that was Andrew Bernstein.
Was that Andy?
Yeah.
And I
Give them the
thought that was
books
good
in
advice.
their hands.
Yeah, if you've got an extra copy of The Fountainhead, or if you can order a couple just so you've always got one on hand, maybe a copy of The Virtue of Selfishness for people who would be more into nonfiction. I thought that was great advice.
Yeah. And Robin says, he says, for me, it was seeing Raka's interview and admiring the honesty in his thinking.
Yeah.
And that was an interview. So that was a Q&A session. So you could see it wasn't just somebody, I am going to impart knowledge onto you and tell you exactly what you should think. No, it was a cognitive back and forth. You could see the wheels turning on both sides.
Yeah. And I'm sure you weren't an objectivist after that interview. No, just enough to make you say, oh, yeah, I got to check this out.
Right.
Yeah. Very good. While we're discussing Atlas Shrugged, consider the case of the wet nurse. Tony, some of you will know that trivia question. And, he was an antagonist of Hank Rearden, totally amoral, non-moral person, complete subjectivist, representing the government, standing in the way of all of Rearden's progress. He believed the materialist ideas of his teachers. There are no values, everything's subjective. You are just matter.
Yeah,
Stuff.
Hank called him non-absolute.
Yeah, because there are no absolutes. Yeah, until that one day when he discovers that values exist, objective values, and they're leaking out of his chest after he's taken a bullet for the Mills.
Oh,
This is somebody who, finally does want to live. It's dramatized by Cheryl Brooks. And as I say, even the guard at the end, the guard standing guard over the Ferris Persuader, and Dagny Taggart says, let me in here or I'm going to shoot you. And he can't decide what to do. He would rather die than make a decision.
yeah.
Do they want to live, such people as that?
Living is using a reason. And the way that I sum it up here is evil is a willful dysfunction of consciousness. And in this way, people who willfully want that dysfunction, they want death, not life.
They would rather that than think. Well, here, I'll wrap up this way. In the Objectivist Ethics, Ayn Rand writes, the standard of value in the Objectivist Ethics, the standard by which one judges what is good or evil, is man's life, or that which is required for man's survival, qua man. Since reason is man's basic means of survival, That which is proper to the life of a rational being is the good. That which negates, opposes, or destroys it is the evil. Evil isn't a power, a force, something, oh, that's close quote, Ayn Rand. I would go on. Evil is not a power. It's not a force. It's not a something that's out there. It's an evaluation of the thoughts and the actions, the facts and the values of an individual. And yes, some people are evil. And no, they do not want to live. Not if to live means to live as a human being.
Mhm.
You know, fortunately, accepting that, yes, some degree of evil does exist, and understanding both its power and its fundamental impotence goes a long way to insulating and protecting you from it.
Yes.
In the home stretch, but there's one more super chat. I've got to give a shout out to Apollo Zeus, who says, Yaron later. Yes, we'll be listening or watching that later. And thank you for your super chat. Very much appreciated. But just to wrap up, again, accepting that some degree of evil does exist and understanding both its power and its fundamental impotence goes a long way to insulating and protecting you from it so that you can deal with it and then brush it aside, at least until it requires attention again, and live your own best life on Earth.